Hi, everyone. I'll go ahead and introduce myself, and then I'll introduce the panel. Thank you so much for coming. We hope this conversation won't be like a diversity inclusion 101. This will be, hopefully, everyone kind of here understands the importance of it. We're actually going to talk about what the work looks like and the different approaches we can take. And the goal of this discussion is for people to walk away with actionable items and a better understanding of how to make more progress in their own spaces or institutions to ensure that people are not being left out in the creation of virtual reality in the industry as a whole. So to introduce myself, I'm Clorama Dorvilias. I'm the founder of Debias VR. We just released a game available on the Oculus Store on Friday, which is a bias training. Thank you. Definitely check it out, download it. It's called Teacher's Lens. I was the main developer and have been working on it for the past 6 months, and it's been funded by Oculus. So the beta is out right now, and we hope to create more trainings like that that kind of more positively engage people into a sustainable way of debiasing or promoting more inclusive behavior. That's a little bit about me. I'll go ahead and introduce the panel. Kris Hermanns. She has been working for more than 25 years, bridging two of her passions, advocating for equity and social justice and philanthropy. In her current role as the CEO of the Pride Foundation, an LGBTQ community foundation in the Northwest, Kris mobilizes resources to affect real change in the lives of people who are most impacted by injustices. One of the ways Pride Foundation has been making this impact recently is through a series of virtual reality films about the lives of trans and gender diversity, created in partnership with Oculus. This gives the audience the opportunity to engage in a whole new way while building awareness, understanding, and empathy. Sounds super cool. Really excited about that. Martina Volkov is our next panelist. She is a serial entrepreneur and an investor with growth and acquisition experience. She's a founding partner at the WXR Fund, a venture fund focused on women-led AR/VR companies, and a venture partner at Jump Cannon, a San Francisco fund focused on underrepresented founders in emerging tech. She is a board member of Seattle Angel and advisor to the Center for Leadership and Strategic Thinking at the University of Washington, and for over 5 years was the president of Seattle Women in Tech. Martina is a World Economic Forum Global Shaper, a member of the Young Entrepreneurs Council, and an alumni of the Schusterman Foundation Reality Program. Probably could do a little bit more in your career, I think. All right, so our next panel is Julie Young. She is the co-founder and CEO of Shift. It's a community-driven company that celebrates and promotes diverse voices in the VR and AR industry. Shift partners with tech companies to create scholarship events, spotlight programs, and workshops for women and other underrepresented groups. Julie also co-runs the Women in AR VR Facebook group. Before Shift, Julie was on the Spectacles team at Snap Incorporated. She's also produced 2 room-scaled VR experiences with emblematic group, Out of Exile, which was at Sundance in 2017, and Across the Line, which was at Sundance at 2016. Julie is a graduate of the University of Pennsylvania, where she studied economics at the Wharton School. Did you get it all? Okay. And last but not least, Christopher Lafayette. He's an industry driver in virtual, mixed, and augmented reality, a discoverer of new immersive technologies, mentor, and public speaker. Christopher has the pleasure of playing a role in advising technology startups, corporations, and small ventures. Christopher has an unusual background working in several tech verticals with deep experiences in each. His passion to develop the right type of co-working spaces for those who seek to join the growing technological eco-habitat has been a focus for some time. He's executed and managed digital business development and brand initiatives for hundreds of campaigns. And he's an expert in the lab to market acceleration. Okay, cool. So thank you again for joining. I'm really excited about this. So you guys seem to all have a passion for, I'm assuming you're on this panel because you're passionate about diversity and inclusion in the work that you guys are doing. Can you guys talk about a little bit, and we can go down the line here, just to get us all on the same page. What made you want to do this type of work in what you're doing today? Or what drives you to do it?
I think that at Pride Foundation, we accelerated our work in this area because I think a couple of things. One is the demographics of this country are more reflective of the global majority, and so it's really, I think, imperative for us to make sure that we're staying out in front to be relevant for our community. The reality is that now that you look at any kind of data, the racial disparities and inequities just continue to grow in this country. And so it was important for us to make sure that we were being much more intentional about how we allocated investments and resources so that we were not doing the same thing and expecting a different outcome, that we actually had to do things differently. And then I think third, over especially the last 18 months to 24 months, we've just seen heightened approval or blanket approval for people to be much more racist and much more visible about their hate. And it's impacting the LGBT community, and especially LGBT communities of color and trans women in particular. And so it's really important for us to do something much more significant, both on a structural institutional level as well as supporting personal transformation and making different decisions about our concrete cash investments.
Cool.
For me, my interest really started from a place of personal experience and frustration. With about 10 years ago, I started my first company in mobile gaming and just was the only woman in the room a lot of the time, whether it was formal meetings or events or a lot of other settings where I was surrounded by peers in the industry. And so I wanted to find more women, I wanted to find more people of color, I wanted to find a community that was more reflective of sort of my personal community and the relationships I really valued there. So that's where it started. And then as I learned more about the value of diversity in teams and the way that can play out economically and the way that plays out more broadly on the social and cultural level, that's where my passion was really ignited, to spend more energy and time in trying to develop inclusive solutions and create spaces where we could bring more people into technology and thinking about how that impact will ripple out into every aspect of our lives, because these products are now touching everything that we do. So it kind of grew over time, but really started from a place of just personal frustration, which is true of a lot of the problems I like to solve.
Yeah, I'm kind of on the same page. Just when I was in college, I didn't, I never would have imagined that I would end up in this sort of work, because in college I never really felt like men and women were treated differently in classes and that sort of thing. But then as soon as I got out of school and went into VR and AR, I started seeing it so it was so blunt and it was so pervasive. And so I started holding like little women in VR events, like wine nights at my house and that kind of thing. And I would just invite over, every woman that I knew in VR, which at the time could all fit in my apartment. And then I co-founded the Women in VR and AR Facebook group. And again, at the time, we were like, let's add all of our friends to this Facebook group. It'll be really fun. And now it's almost 10,000 members. So yeah, it's been great, but again, it kind of comes from this place of like personal experience.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, I think for me, the inspiration point is that I was born into it. I've known it all my life. A kid from Oakland who's found himself here in Silicon Valley and on a stage. It's an unbelievable story. We could talk about it afterward. But one of the things I've looked at, and since being in technology for a number of years, worked with all different types of corporations and platforms on a level of different projects, worked with all types of hackers, makers, and builders, is that diversity does have look, let's talk about it. We're here to talk about it at AWE, is that first wave diversity is that we acknowledge that diversity here in Silicon Valley is a problem, and there's a lack of it. But at some point, somebody has to lead the drive and the initiative to say, we know it's a problem, but what are we going to do about it? We have to start looking and stop looking at diversity and inclusion as a good thing to do for companies to be able to help support, instead of looking at it in a better way and saying that diversity is a revenue driver. We're talking business here. When we're talking about the reality is that when we look at the despairing numbers when it comes to underrepresented members in Silicon Valley, the people that are here on this stage, the leaders that are on this stage, we're all playing and contributing to a part in saying, hey, we're not trying to, and I'm going to say it, my white friends, we're not trying to take your jobs. But what we are saying is that everybody needs to come and build this great dynamic technology that we're looking at, which is so appropriate for extended reality itself, since it's the newest, greatest emerging technology on the planet. And when I looked over my shoulder to my left and right, I didn't see anybody else equipped and better to do it than besides someone that's been in it for a number of years. And so for me, to go back to the question, Clorama, and to piggyback on everyone else's shoulders, I think we're all born into it. Not because we wanted to, not because it was an option, not because it was a decision, but we were faced at this opposition ever since the day that we decided to get into technology. And so we had to do something about it.
So that's very good points. On that note, and I think in the last few recent years, we have heard diversity and inclusion starting to become more of a common publicly, a more public conversation or public debates are happening. This social media, I think, has given a voice to a lot of marginalized voices that normally wouldn't have been listened to, and I think that a lot of those sentiments have been spread, and now it's just becoming a very common narrative. Who do you see in the tech industry now, and particularly VR as well, if you see any shining examples, do you think has actually done a good job of moving the needle, of actually making those changes and addressing that topic? And do you see any of those examples? And what do you think why do you think they are able to do that?
Myself. That's who I see in this industry, is actually making an example. I have my team, our postmodern apprenticeship program that's with us today. In fact, I want you guys to stand up real quick. Show them, this is what diversity actually looks like. We have women, people from the LGBT community, underrepresented members of color. This is Silicon Valley. This is what I'm looking at. And so, again, we looked around and said, well, who are the companies that are, you guys can sit down, who are the companies that are actually taking the time to say, okay, this is what we're all about? And I said, if I can't, the days of us saying, hey, Apple, you should do this, you should be the change you want to see. And so we had to step up to the mountain and said, well, I'm going to build it. Well, where have I been building? I've been building what's called a postmodern apprenticeship program to be able to help parents, mom and mom, dad and dad, to be able to show forth an example to their children that, hey, we can actually get hired and work for Apple, we can work for Facebook, we could be on a stage here at AWE, and to be able to help people to get jobs. Because if you look at CEOs and executives right now, when they acknowledge that diversity was a problem, all of them, across the board, Tim Cook, Elon Musk, we can have a conversation. But when we looked at it, what ended up happening is they said, okay, let's put some fires out. We have a diversity problem, and let's assemble a D&I team to be able to help address it. And so all of a sudden, we said, okay, we have to have a certain amount of quota to meet every single year of certain people of color and sex and nationality, creed, caste, you name it. And so what ended up happening is that we fell into this, okay, now we're going to contribute to diversity because it's a good thing to do. And it is a good thing to do, but we have to look at it as a revenue driver. And at the end of the day, it comes to being able to help people to get jobs, Clorama.
Okay, yeah, I'm going to circle back to that point.
Sure.
Because I think there's a lot there that I want to untangle. However, I want to ask you, Kris. You're as a CEO of Pride Foundation. I watched one of your videos on YouTube where I think it was like your third day in, and you talked about what your goals were for the initiative, and how you had said basically that in urban communities you feel there's been a lot of success in getting more equality for LGBTQ communities, but your task would be to try and move the needle in the rural communities where you see it as still a huge problem. I don't know when that video was and how long that time was.
Oh, 7 years ago.
7 years ago? Okay. Has there been any progress in getting LGBTQ to be more accepted in rural communities? And if so, what did that work look like to make that happen?
Well, it looks like our 360 films, a couple of them take place, one's in Idaho and one's in Montana. I think that we still have challenges in urban settings, and you can definitely, with queer people of color and trans people of color in particular, there's, in terms of homelessness, in terms of hate crimes and bias crimes, I mean, they're higher than ever. And in terms of economic security and economic opportunity, still huge challenges. I think it's actually more of a public narrative and media challenge, is that people, when you travel in the communities, especially in rural and remote communities, people have found ways to build community, virtually. Because, if you're in Alaska, you don't drive anywhere. You take a plane everywhere within this state. If you're Montana, it's 8-mile drive an 8-hour drive between towns. And so that isolation is real for people. And so then it's figuring out how do you make sure that the virtual communities you try to create are really there. But part of the 360 films we did with Oculus was really about helping shape and share a different narrative so that the dominant narrative isn't about the white, overschooled, middle, upper class gay person. Telling the story, that then becomes the dominant narrative. It's about the strength and the resilience that Native Americans, Two-Spirit people, and rural communities. It's so that I think it's just kind of complicating that. And what you uncover is that people have great supports locally. They may be under-resourced and under-invested in, but there's really the kind of transformative leaders there that have been pretty much marginalized and casted in shadows for a really long time. So I think mostly it's trying to elevate and amplify those stories, those narratives in those people and in these communities, because there is that I think dissonance with the public narrative. And I would say, especially over, again, the last 18 months, where there's this constant conversation in this country about the urban-rural divide, but it is actually a certain rural people that everyone's referencing. And that's not the queer people, Native American people, migrant farm workers. It's a very singular experience that people are talking that we're not being sensitive or we're not being open to the rural experience. It's actually, it's much more complex. And if we kind of pulled that part, it's a very exciting conversation.
Yeah, so talking about those 360 films that you're bringing to those people to change it, like, are you seeing people having their minds changed? Like, do they work? Like, have you, like, to what point or what metrics do you use to, like, do you know that it's meeting its goals?
Great question. And actually, that's the phase we are in now.
Yeah.
So folks know we put together with Jesse Allen and Jeremiah Allen from our shop, and Paul Aquino from Oculus, 360 films featuring individual trans and gender diverse people. And it was a way to help try to create a public narrative that was told by the individual trans and gender diverse person, because it was a narrative that really wasn't out there. And it was specifically in this context because there's such a huge anti-trans backlash, both in this country but across the globe. And so it's been premiering at South by Southwest, Tribeca, Cannes, and I think Sheffield next month. And so we're really optimistic about the possibility of people being immersed for a period of time in a different experience. And so one of the things we're talking about is, like, how do we take this kind of work, and because there's been a strong response by parents and children, especially broadly. And I would say concretely what we know is that, and everywhere that it's premiered, we had engagement postcards immediately after people saw the film to say, there's attempts to repeal and prevent trans people from serving in the military. There's attempts to repeal all of the protections for transgender children and students in the schools, and that people could watch the film and then come right out and fill out a postcard and send it to any one of their representatives, or send a story to a family member. And Jesse and Jeremiah and Paula can talk to you about that as Jesse says, there's like this great VR stuff, and then you've got this analog, a postcard and a pen. What do you do with that? And the response in terms of when people came out of viewing the films was like, sign me up, and people spent 5, 10, 20 minutes filling out the postcards in order to be able to actually take action. And so we're now at a place where we're starting to think about how do we do kind of a short pre-post and then work with the films to really think about the next phase of deepening the experience for people.
Okay. Oh, cool. That sounds great. Julie and Martina, you guys, Julie, you're the founder of Women in VR AR. I know, Martina, you had a hand, I think, helping with that in the beginning. Not really. Oh, okay. Sorry, I apologize about that. But anyways, well, you started Women in VR. And you, it's like I think it is the largest VR Facebook group, I would think, in general, right? Is it?
It's probably not larger than the one that's like virtual reality
Okay.
in all caps.
I haven't
but
seen that one. The fact that I haven't seen it. Yeah. But Women in VR is like 10,000 followers.
almost 10,000, yeah.
Yeah, and you said you had just started that out of personal frustration, and you kind of.
Yeah, my co-founder and I, we were just like, let's just add our friends to a group.
Yeah.
And then, as it grew and grew and grew, it became such a huge resource to the community that spanned a lot of different companies. And yeah, it's been really incredible to watch it grow.
Yeah, great. And so managing that, and I'm sure you didn't expect to be the founder of a 10,000.
Yeah.
Yeah.
People say like, oh, what do you do? And I'm like, I have this Facebook group.
Yeah. So at what point did this become starting to be like not just a hobby, but this, because groups like that are hard to manage. There's rules, and I saw that you had started posting that, and there was a lot of discussions and internal debates, and with such a large group of women, I think it's like 20% men as well that are allies.
It's 20% men, yeah.
Okay, and then there's a lot of intersectionality issues as well. How did you, not having like a background of professional experience in dealing with this, how did you kind of work to maybe research or better understand how to best approach a lot of what was happening, or in terms of like discussions back and forth, or what role did you decide to take on in doing that and trying to do the work of managing these kind of conflicts internally? Or
Right. Yeah, it's a really good question, and it's something that we think about a lot.
Yeah.
And so it's not just me that runs the group. We have like a team of 6 admins and moderators. So there's a lot of like very smart, hardworking people that also are contributing to it all the time.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's really difficult because you basically run into this question of, like sometimes people, they see something and they want it deleted.
Yeah.
But other people don't want it deleted.
Yes, yeah.
And it's just a really hard line, and especially as the group grew to the size that it is now, that's a big responsibility.
Yeah.
So we tend to err on the side of not deleting things. Like we try to view ourselves as air traffic control rather than flying the airplane, because for every issue that comes up, there might be a woman in VR who says one thing, and there might be a woman in VR who disagrees and says another thing.
Yeah.
And it's not our job to say, oh, this woman is right and this woman is wrong, and that's the official stance of women in VR. Our job is more to provide a platform for those people to communicate. But obviously, we do run into issues where we have to delete content or remove members or kick people out. Or
Well, in saying that, I'm interested in like thinking, what are your long-term goals with Women in VR AR in terms of like the impact that it can make in this industry? Having such a large group of following, what do you guys have goals or try to facilitate initiatives even within to kind of harness the potential of making either more sub-communities or like mentorship, or like what are the things that you're doing to better integrate what's happening there to kind of grow within the industry itself, like trickle over into the industry? Like what impact are you looking for that to make?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. We just launched, one of the things that we noticed as the group grew was that all of a sudden people don't feel comfortable posting, right? Because you're posting to 10,000 people, there's representatives from pretty much every major tech company in the world in there. So one thing that we're trying to sort of deal with now is how do you continue to get contribution and get value from people who don't necessarily want to post to 10,000 people. So one thing that we're doing now is we launched a mentorship program, which the Facebook team was kind enough to give us sort of beta access to. It's a groups feature. And we were able to pair up, people can apply as mentors or mentees, and we're able to pair people up just sort of across the industry. And that has been, that's been like an incredible experience for me, because I'm seeing all these incredibly high caliber people that I had no idea were a part of our group, applying as mentors. And so I think creating more sort of low friction ways for people to connect is going to sort of be what strengthens us in the long run. So mentorship is sort of our next goal for the year, I'd say. Beyond that, we definitely want to look into a more sustainable sort of localized community events, maybe have like a leader in New York or a leader in Chicago, and events are always a lot harder than they seem. So
Yeah, but that sounds really cool.
Can I add that
yeah.
I'm really glad I make up part of the 20% group that she has.
Yeah.
I think it's one of the most advanced VR groups I think that is on the planet.
Yeah.
I really do.
Definitely.
It's a strong group.
Yeah. And Martina, you said you've worked a lot with helping underrepresented founders. You do a lot of venture capital, investing. You have this experience in yourself. Particularly, you said with women and people of color. And I was curious what that work looks like in terms of the intersectionality of that. Do you have to do a different approach when you're mentoring women of color, whether it's like Latinas or blacks, and how do you consciously do that versus a different approach with maybe white women who maybe have a little bit more access to resources than those? Is that something that you see? And then if not, what do you do to work that extra muscle to try and bring the intersectionality piece into it?
Yeah, definitely. So on both the venture teams I work on, we are doing a lot of work constantly on interrogating our own biases and better understanding where our blind spots are in the way that we're evaluating opportunities, as well as in the way that we're supporting our founders and our companies we're working with. And some of that I think can be helped by just getting more representation in the rooms and in those decision-making processes, so that it's not all, one perspective represented. So we try to really bring more people into those conversations, and on a lot of dimensions, including race and economic privilege, as well as age and different types of experience. Just as much as possible, trying to bring different voices to the table. And sometimes that's formal, sometimes that's informal, but applying intention to that. And when we do have gaps, when we don't have all the representation we'd like to have, to at least consult outside resources as we can. And then in terms of supporting the companies, we also have a mentorship program that we're working with. And when we're thinking about, so much of access to venture capital and even angel funding is based on sort of network effects, and it can be very opaque and difficult to navigate if you don't know where the gateways are and how to sort of start making headway into those networks. And so a lot of what we try to do is consciously disrupt the way those networks happen. And we've had a lot of allies step up, male allies and various women in positions of power throughout the industry step up and say they want to actively contribute to that and be a part of opening doors and coaching people and helping to make that whole system less mysterious, because it can be, if you're a first-time entrepreneur trying to figure out how to raise money and trying to figure out, just how to get those conversations started, that's an incredibly steep hill to climb, and it's, steeper for women, steeper for people of color, and so that's something where we're just trying to make. It's always going to be difficult. I don't claim that we can make that easy, and maybe it never should be really easy necessarily, but we're trying to make it more equitable and to just provide more transparent opportunities for people to engage in resources so that they are equipped to step into those opportunities.
Yeah, great. Okay, so now let's go ahead and start having a discussion. Conversation. I'm going to throw some questions in the air. You spoke about diversity inclusion councils. I have my own criticisms about the way that the corporations and companies kind of use those, and for me, it's really important in a lot of the companies that I've worked at. When I see bias training or diversity inclusion stuff, the metrics, it doesn't seem very research-driven in the goals that they put out. It doesn't seem very attached to improving the day-to-day experience outside of improving the numbers for the organization as a whole. They're not really thinking about the individual day-to-day microaggressions, things that happen that can actually lead to the larger course. And so, what is something in all your different approaches, how have you used research to say this is the best solution for that? And then what ways have you looked at metrics to measure impact? Like, what are your measurements for success? We work in the tech industry, VR, like every product that we put out to fix a problem, the way that we determine if it's working, we look at the metrics and success, what's the engagement, how do we do that? And what are the different, and maybe it's using through the VR solutions maybe you might have, or that. What are the ways that you guys have done that in your own work to drive accountability to ensuring that you are making a positive impact? And what are the goals that you're set? Are they ambitious, or are they just kind of like, what
Yeah, one of the things we did with our postmodern apprenticeship program, and I think that's a fantastic question when we start dealing with metrics, because most of the metrics that we're seeing come down the pipeline, I hate to break it to you, they're vanity metrics.
Yeah.
And we got to get past that, these fulfillments of quotas. And so one of the things we did last summer and on, we went and talked to major corporations from Google to CZI to Facebook and members that said, well, what are some of the biggest pain points that you guys are dealing with when it comes to D&I? And interesting enough, a lot of them said, well, while we like supporting youth camps and while we like supporting hackathons, we just don't feel like they're doing enough. Because we have to look at, in terms of our investments that we're putting out there, what's our ROI? There's a real narrative and there's a real conversation that's happening right now when it comes to diversity being a revenue driver. A lot of them are saying, well, when we look at the metrics, we're doing everything we can to be able to get as many people of underrepresented member communities in there, but when I look at the statistic, real statistics, it's 2% African American penetration. I have a good story for you and I'll be done. AWE, this conference that you guys are sitting in right now, in the month of February, the list came out of speakers. There's 350 speakers. I looked at it. Now, some consider me one of the biggest drivers of immersive technology on the planet. I didn't say it, it's what people say. Hey, I'll take it. Out of 350 speakers, there wasn't one single it ends on a good note, there wasn't one single African-American speaker of over 350 speakers in immersive technology. Now, me looking at that, having been in it for years, having known all kinds of people, including Clorama herself, I messaged Tish Shute, the co-founder of this organization. I said, Tish, what's going on? We got a situation. She said, Kris, it's usually not my department, but I agree we need to deal with it. Minutes later, I heard from Ori Imbar, I heard from Tom Emmerich. I hope the press is taking this. This is a good story. And I heard from them, and we said, well, instead of complaining about the situation, how do we make it right? How do we take this situation and make it into a winnable opportunity? They said, Kris, we want to work with you and your team to be able to find African-American representation. And I said, I'd be more than happy to. In fact, I'd be more than happy to host your official after party at my location as well, which we're actually, by the way, shameless plug, we're doing the Atrium Studio, which is the largest green screen studio in Silicon Valley. It's a huge thing saying it from just a kid from Oakland. Now I'm going somewhere with this, and me and Clorama are a product of that conversation and saying, hey, we want more. But I can also speak for myself. I can't speak for Clorama, but I think she would be in sync with this is, I don't want AWE believing that since they had a quota that they had to fill, they needed to have us here. I like to think that me and Clorama are on this stage now because they really like what it is that we contribute to our industry. And so we don't want to look like another set of quotes that are coming to work for Apple. Tim Cook, I love a MacBook, I love an iPad, but I don't want to be part of the statistic and saying when we look at people that are getting hired for jobs, we have to hire this person because they're black.
And I think I would even say, like, and that's very much felt. You can always feel when you're being given an opportunity because of, not because of your merit, but because of, oh, check on the box.
It's check on a box and it's real. I mean, when you think about it, and let me say this, because when I talk about diversity and inclusion to groups, and I'm speaking all around Silicon Valley, I talk about it on LinkedIn, let me be clear, and so Silicon Valley can know, we're not interested in getting handouts from Silicon Valley. We are interested in extending a hand to help Silicon Valley. Because a month ago, Starbucks didn't think that they had a diversity problem. But they just spent a $12 million cup of coffee yesterday because they realized that we do have a D&I problem. So we have to address it, change it, and the only way that we're going to do it is to continue to have a progressive narrative on how we deal with it. Eliminate unconscious biases where we can, especially in the hiring process, and get people here in Oakland, across the water from this place where the wealth of the world is, and across from the water, people are starving to work. They are qualified, but we are hiring people with H-1B visas from India and Pakistan. I've got no problem with them. Work with people in India and Pakistan on the dime. But why don't you go into the backyards, here in your own backyard, and hire locally? People want to work.
Yeah.
And this is what they look like.
Yeah, and it starts with shifting. But
I think part of the challenge is that the goal is being discussed as diversity and inclusion when they're actually component parts to equity. And so what we have to be talking about, and what everyone's talking about, is equity, is equitable access to opportunities and to resources and investments, and so whatever field you're in and whatever work you're doing. I mean, so I think because then the issues around metrics and the issue around D&I is about numbers and representation, and it oftentimes is like, oh, it went up, we stopped.
Yeah.
And so I think, and diversity and inclusion have to be pulled apart because it's also quite different. And making the cultural shift within organizations and or a sector or a field or in VR broadly, I mean, it's very complex.
Yeah.
But it's all towards that. It can all have a financial drive to it, but it is about equitable access and
That's
equitable experience.
Yes,
That's a good point.
Yes, but the VR industry, the tech industry is not, their first priority is not equitable access. It's how do I get my product to sell? How do I,
Well, it has to be. Well,
who do I get on the team that I can
sure.
work with, that I feel comfortable with,
Right.
that's going to deliver this thing? So how do we get them to, and you said it's a revenue driver. Yes, it's a revenue driver, but it's only a revenue driver if they do diversity and inclusion in the right way. So at what point, what can they do today? Like, what can companies do today to actually ensure, like, what practices should be happening to ensure that not only is their team diverse, but in order to get different access of different types of ideas and to be open to innovation in the way that we like to say we are, but truly open to innovation. So, like, I guess to articulate this better is, how do we debunk the need for conformity in our cultural norms for the tech industry, so that we're open to a diverse, truly open to people who are different, who might think different, in order so that way we can invite them to the table, not feeling comfortable by their difference, and allow them to contribute in a way that might feel different to us or uncomfortable, because how do we get out of our comfort zone, basically, and embrace getting out of our comfort zone for getting these different people at the table, pulling that muscle to work harder to get those additional help, because if they're not in our social circle, as a company, and they're harder to do it, that's more resources I have to expend. So what do you recommend people do in that sense to actually engage it, versus just throwing out nice ideas of like, oh, well, we'll mentor and we'll whatever. That's great. That's a key. But how do you get that? How do you not make sure that it's not a vanity metric, but an actual, are these people that we're working with, do they feel like they can be here? Do they feel like they can work here? How do we get the emotional metrics from the people that we're working with that are underrepresented, that we're trying to help, and give them the access to opportunities that we say that we may have overlooked in so doing? Or does that make sense to what I'm trying to say?
Are you looking at it from the company perspective or from
from a company perspective, from an individual perspective? I mean, we're a VR industry.
Yeah,
There's a lot of people working here, and they imagine like everyone here wants to do the right thing and they want to get more people on board, but it might not be easy. How do you do that in a way?
Well, what we did in that sojourn that we took last year with our team, and this isn't just something we started last summer. We have a lot of people that have been heavy, hard-hitting, and having these conversations with corporations for years and decades, really, but it's now coming to light. One of the things we did is say, okay, let's look at your pain points, and a lot of them were colloquial in their sentiments and saying, hey, we need more underrepresented representation. And we said, you know what, here's what we're going to do. We're going to create a company platform. We're going to go to you and say, how many different engineers, how many developers, how many designers do you need? And at PMA, Postmodern Apprenticeship Program, you're going to have a fidelity with us. We're going to have these people that are already qualified in their hard skill training, and we're going to update them on soft skill training. They're going to be hard skill, soft skill, qualified. They're going to be the best of the best. We're going to offer these people to you.
Yeah.
They're going to work, and we're going to give you the best candidates available for you to be able to hire.
Okay.
So you cannot use an excuse, Silicon Valley, that we don't have people to hire. We have access to tens of thousands of people that look like me and everyone on this stage that want to work. We talk with people even just as soon as, not 2 weeks ago, from Berkeley, say, we can't even get people to some of these companies won't even give us an interview.
Yeah.
We don't even know how to get the interview. How can I get in there?
Yeah.
It's a shame. It's a shame, but it doesn't have to be a shame. It's a new day in Silicon Valley when it comes to being able to be hired. Look, this is coming from people that know. I've slept outside of Google. I know what it is to live outside of my car, living out of hacker spaces for an opportunity. I was one of the ones that I went all over Silicon Valley, very qualified. I couldn't get a job. So the only opportunity that I was left with, when my back against the wall, is to create the platform and help people to come along the way to win. We all can win. It doesn't have to be a dream. And I don't want children to think that, especially black youth, especially white youth, especially all-color youth, to go to a Black Panther event, love the movie, to think that technology only stays in a Marvel. These kids don't even think that they can do it, and they see something on TV that's fictitious, and it's happening right across the water.
Yeah. So we talked about quite a few things. Yeah, which is great. Go on, applause. That was great. So one of the things that I hear like as a strong solution that a company that people can take away is one, work with people who have the access to diverse talents, to build relationships with the look first locally versus to build the talent, to train the talent so that they can hire versus spending their resources investing in outside populations when we have a huge pool here. Is there anything else like?
I think one of the things. Oh, sorry.
No, go for it.
I was just going to say, I think one of the things for the hiring to be successful, and you sort of alluded to this earlier too, is it will require in really every organization, because we're talking about systemic societal biases and deeply ingrained practices that we don't even notice, that it requires very, very deep organizational cultural work and really understanding where those biases are and being able to talk about it. I mean, so often there's a lot of anxiety, a lot of fear around just having real dialogue and being able to confront one's own blind spots, and that's a big process for anyone to undertake, and especially at an organizational level when you're trying to make a shift of several hundred or thousands of people at once. So that requires really strong leadership as well as experts to come. I think we were talking about the Starbucks example backstage. It's more than just one training. That's a beginning, but there's a lot of deep work that has to happen for that to really be successul.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I think to Chris's point, Starbucks had to admit it had a problem.
Yeah.
And I would say that most companies aren't in a place where they recognize they've been called out.
Right. Yeah.
So they're trying to figure out how do they respond.
Yeah.
It is not, I think it's critical to say across the organization, across the company, it's that there's actually principles behind why you're doing it, and you believe it. Because I think Julie raised a very good point about as the group gets bigger, it's important that everyone has an opportunity. Like, this is all getting conflated with free speech. We want everyone to be able to have a voice. Not everything that everyone expresses has the same value. And this, it's real in terms of what is playing out here in Silicon Valley. People don't even think they have a gender issue. And we're just seeing that uncovered. So I think, as they say, the first thing is to just admit you have a problem.
Yeah. So for the VR industry, and this will be the last question before, please wrap up. Okay, we have a minute and 26 seconds. All right, so the last question is, a VR industry is nascent, it's new. It's a sector in the technology. We are inevitably going to have to inherit the tragedies of the tech industry in terms of trying to reach this issue. The tech industry in itself was pioneered by female engineers. However, that switched. VR, a lot of people are touting now, well, VR is different. There's more diversity. We're good. We just have to keep it up. How do we prevent what happened in the grand scheme of the tech industry from happening in this VR, where it might be more diverse in the early beginning, but then it might do a shift again? What's the thing that we can do to make sure that this is it only grows and get people mindful and prioritizing diversity and inclusion in whatever work they do, first and foremost, alongside with getting the product out?
My 4-second advice is this, and I know that we're wrapped for time, and here it is: extended reality. It's the narrative of this conversation. Extended reality. Don't forget reality. We are extending reality, and reality isn't homogenous. Reality is diverse. Developers, designers, content creators, you've got a lot of hardware that just came on the scene. Take advantage of the opportunity. The people that you want to buy your products, you need to hire those people to make your products. That's it.
I think, similar to what Martina was saying earlier, I think we all just have to continue to be loud and to really accept that it's hard to confront your blind spots. It's really hard to do this kind of to do this kind of work, and I've lost track of the number of times that people have messaged me and said, I have this opening for a job at my company, and I only got one female applicant. What should I do? And I say, well, did you post it in this big Facebook group I have, and they say no, and they're like, well, I wasn't sure if I should, like I wasn't sure if I'm allowed to. I'm like, you should definitely post it in the group. That's why it's there. But a lot of it stems from kind of like people are sort of they're uncomfortable, and they don't want to face the fact that they might end up in an uncomfortable situation if, maybe if the wording was wrong in their job posting and somebody calls them out for it. But it's like we all have to like get over ourselves and like deal with the fact that this is a real problem and work towards a positive solution.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
That's great. So yeah, hopefully we could all take the Starbucks approach, and if we get called out or something happens, we own up to it, we apologize, and we do what we need to do top down to make sure that that doesn't happen again as best as possible. But we'll see what happens with the bias training. Anyways, thank you everyone for joining us. Apologies, we didn't have time for Q&A. But I hope that was beneficial. Yeah.